Hello everybody, welcome back to another podcast. So Crawl and Stuber were released in theaters last weekend. Let's see how those movies did at the box office. Alright, let's jump right into the box office top 10. Coming in number 1 is, unsurprisingly, Spider-Man Far From Home. Is the latest Spider-Man movie. That's under the stewardship of Marvel. The movie in the second weekend dropped 51% from the previous weekend to pull in about 45.3 million. And domestic gross is 274 million so far. And let's see how it did overseas. 572 million overseas for a worldwide total of 847 million on a budget of 160 million. So even though Far From Home had a lower weekend opening than Homecoming, but remember, Far From Home had a couple more days. In the weekend it opened on like a Tuesday evening or something like that, and it went on for like 6 days. Whereas Homecoming, opened on a Friday, so it had a couple more days. So in the same time frame, they're kind of relatively similar, except that Far From Home is like a tad ahead of Homecoming. So I think it's going to do well. Has a lower second weekend drop off as well for Far From Home. So I think it's going to stay in theaters, and it's probably going to surpass Homecoming's domestic gross. Alright, let's move on to number 2, which is Toy Story 4. The movie dropped about 39% from the previous weekend to pull in about 20.7 million. In its fourth weekend, domestic gross is 346 million. And let's see, overseas it pulled in 427 million for a worldwide total of 773 million. Alright, moving along to number 3 is one of the new releases last weekend, which is the horror thriller movie Crawl. It pulled in 12 million in its opening weekend, which is pretty good. The budget is about 14 million or so. The movie star Kaya Scodelario and Barry Pepper. Scodelario plays this woman who is looking for her dad that's trapped in the crawl space of her home in Florida. And there's this huge hurricane coming along, and the rising water causes this crocodile or whatever creature to splash around in the crawl space of her dad's home, and she gets trapped in there, and that's where the thrills comes from, I guess, from escaping from this killer crocodile. This is a movie that I said could probably open to 10 to 15 million, and it's just right there, 12 million estimated figure, right? The actual numbers haven't come in yet, but about 12 million is actually just about within my opening range for Crawl. Reviews wise is actually pretty good, right? This movie has 89% on the tomato meter and a B cinema score. So critically they liked it, but again, this movie suffer from the problem with no stars. The budget is within the special effects here, and Scodelario is a beautiful actress. Barry Pepper is a name previously, right? But those are not gonna pull the the general audience in. This is only for horror fans, and for horror fans, this is like a typical opening for a typical horror movie. So there you go. Crawl. It's actually well reviewed, surprisingly, the good word of mouth and review will actually help it stay in theaters longer. Number 4 is the other new releases last weekend, and that is the action comedy Stuber. It pulled in 8 million in its opening frame. Reviews wise, it's not that good. 45% on the tomato meter and a B cinema score. This is another movie that I said could potentially open in the 10 to 15 million range, but it opened lower than that. It opened to about 8 million or so. Again, same with Crawl. It suffers from, I guess, a recognizable name. In the lead actors, this movie stars Kumail Nanjiani and Dave Bautista, the guy who is best known in WWE, the Wrestling Federation, and the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and those two team up in this action movie. It's joined by the Indonesian star Iko Uwais. Again, like I say, lack of star power hampered this action movie. The previous weekend was Spider-Man now, right bookend by Spider-Man, and this weekend is going to be by The Lion King. So there's a lull in this week, so they decide to schedule their movies between this weekend, and I guess the opening for these two new releases is just about right there. All right, number 5 is yesterday. The movie that features the soundtrack of the Beatles is holding up quite well. The movie only dropped about 33% from the previous weekend to pull in about 6.8 million. In its third weekend, domestic gross is about 48 million, and let's see how it did overseas. 20 million overseas for a worldwide total of 68 million. The movie only cost 26 million to make, so actually great returns right there. Again, all these famous bands, musicians, their musics are on display recently in these movies, and those movies are actually, and including this one, is actually doing quite well. Okay, number 6 is the live-action adaptation of Disney's Aladdin. It pulled in about 5.9 million in its 8th weekend, drop off about 22% from the previous weekend. Domestic gross is 331 million so far. Overseas, it pulled in 629 million for a worldwide total of 961 million. It's getting there, getting to the 1 billion barrier. Okay, number 7 is the latest Annabelle movie. Annabelle Comes Home. In its 3rd weekend, it pulled in 5.6 million. Drop off about 41% from the previous weekend. Domestic gross is about 61 million. You're still doing pretty well. I don't think the budget cost that much. It's probably in the 20s or 30s, or maybe even lower, since this is kind of a horror movie, and I think the actors aren't paid that well. Overseas it pulled in 113 million for a worldwide total of 174 million. Okay, moving along to number 8 is Midsommar. It's the thriller, about a couple who went to a retreat that turns out to be a pagan cult, and bad things happen to them, right? So this movie in the second weekend dropped about 46% to pull in 3.6 million in the second weekend. Domestic gross is about 18 million so far. Again, like Crawl and Stuber, this Midsommar is one of these movies that's kind of like a throwaway movie that's studios slotted in, low budget. They could slot into one of these weekends. Number 9 is The Secret Life of Pets 2. In the 6th weekend, it pulled in 3.1 million. It dropped off about 34% from the previous weekend. Domestic gross is 147. Worldwide, it pulled in 269 million, with 122 million from overseas. While The Secret Life of Pets 2 then performed up to the level of the first movie, box office wise, the budget's only 80 million, so it's actually doing pretty well. Alright, let's close out the top 10 with Men in Black International. The movie pulled in 2.2 million in its 5th weekend, drop off of about 41% from the previous week. Domestic gross is about 76 million. Overseas, it pulled in 162 million for a worldwide total of 239 million. The budget is 110 million, so it's kind of about broke even, but it's not the success that Sony, Columbia had hoped this movie to do. I mean, the previous 3 Men in Black movies did well. Those were the one with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, right? But this one, they kind of spun the series off with Chris Hemsworth and Tessa Thompson. Liam Neeson is in there as well, and unsurprisingly, the brand didn't carry through. While it performed huge numbers, it cost 110 million. So then the movie needs to make work harder to make that money back. And domestically, we don't know if it will cross the 100 million barrier by the way the movie is dropping, and depending on how things go, I mean, this might be the last Men in Black movie that we'll see in a while. Alright, so that's it for the box office top 10. Let's move on to the new releases this weekend. We're going to have just one big one, which is The Lion King. It's the latest Disney live action adaptation. It features the voices of James Earl Jones, J.D. McCary, John Oliver is in here, Chiwetel Ejiofor, the Kean Michael Key, etc., etc. So some famous voices, well-known voices that are in The Lion King. It has already opened in China already, and it pulled in about 54 million there. I think this is one of the movies that are that is going to do well. Lion King is one of like I said, Disney's pillar movies, along with like Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, etc. Aladdin did well, Beauty and the Beast did well. Even The Jungle Book did well. but the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes are not that glowing. I mean, one of the complaints is that, while the special effects are great, right? But, it's kind of like a paint by the number storyline. I mean, because, it is the Lion King, right? They're not going to differ that much from the animation, even with Aladdin, it is like too much like the animation, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, Disney is trying to appeal to the younger group, and they might not have seen the animated version, right? And this is what the CGI version, this is a new and updated version, which they could put in and take out the vote as they please. So 59% on Rotten Tomatoes so far. But again, I think this is one of those movies that are review proof. I think parents are going to take their young ones to see this one, because the special effects are great. So how will this movie do at the box office? I think it's going to probably open up, to I think Beauty and the Beast level. Beauty and the Beast open to like 175 million. So for the Lion King, I think it's gonna open to somewhere in the 165 million to 170 million range. All right, so that's it for this week's podcast. Tune in next week to see how I did. Until then, take care. Bye bye.